Okay, hello and welcome to the first Actual Magicians, yes I'm an Actual Magicians Meetup, where I'm going to be discussing all aspects of occultism, Western Esotericism, and in particular the Western Esoteric Initiatory System that I actually teach. So we've got plenty of books behind us, we have a chat window, so I'm hoping to take a lead from you guys. If you've got questions, this is a good time to ask them. If you've got questions about tarot or alchemy or ritual, witchcraft, hedge witchcraft, spell casting, invocation, evocation, any aspects of occultism that I have any experience in or any study of, then hopefully we can discuss that and answer your questions. So if we don't get anyone into this first meeting because of whatever reason, then I'm going to do a sort of default talk about Kabbalah and about the initiatory system and about tarot, depending on where things take me. So hopefully we will have some people in the chat at some point. Some people may join this chat. Otherwise, we're going to have a very quiet lesson, teaching, discussion, extemporaneous talk, whatever it may be. So I'm just going to have a look at some of the settings here and make sure that I can actually see what I've got in front of me. I think I have volume control. Let's have a look. Yep, that appears to be okay. We've got string control. We've got a chat window, top chat, live chat. Okay, so that's live chat, participants. This is the first time I've used YouTube, the sort of inbuilt system of YouTube, to actually do a presentation. I've done presentations for ages using all sorts of platforms. I'm currently using and playing around with OBS to actually do presentations and so forth, but this is the very first time I've just used the basic. And hello to Luke. Thank you for joining us. We have maybe 3 people there. And Tony, excellent. And good for the sound check. That's brilliant. So just in case anyone is wondering, I don't know, I've been noticing this on my feed whenever I've recorded, because I've been recording this year lots of YouTube videos, one every day for various things with recommendations of books. And this is a leak in the roof. It's very wet here in the Lake District, and the place that I'm in at the moment is very nice, has a nice view, but unfortunately has a hole in the roof. And this is not demonic possession slowly creeping out of the far corner. The crystal ball at the very back, just there, is glass crystal, I think. That's what it is. It's very heavy. I know that. I've had to move it around several times, and it lurks in the background as a sort of reminder that I have a computer screen at this side of the 4 quarters. I have obviously an angel on this side, and I have the horn god and goddess on this side, and I have the crystal ball for divination on the other side. Every room in the house has some sort of purposeful placement of things following generally magical principles and so forth. So we've got a nice tight group. So we've got Martha, Luke and Tony and myself. So say I was going to I usually default to filling in a piece of paper with the Tree of Life and tarot cards and use that as my explainer of everything, which I tend to do all of the time. Since I was a mere kid, I've used Kabbalah as a roadmap, as a route map, as a template, as a filter as an examination of the universe. So I tend to think naturally Kabbalistically, I guess. And that's really important when you're reading people like Aleister Crowley, Arthur Edward Wade, Dion Fortune, and so forth. Quite often their poetry is either explicitly or unconsciously structured in a Kabbalistic way. Whenever you see, and they took all of this from Eliphas Levi, of course, who one of his first books is actually chaptered by the tarot cards, and so it's broken into the Hebrew letters as well, so 22 chapters and so forth. Crowley mimicked that in Magic in Theory and Practice. So there's a lot of, every time you see 10 lines of poetry, if you see sort of 12 paragraphs or 22 paragraphs or whatever, that's usually, it does have a Kabbalistic basis to it. So it's one of the first reasons I ever learned Kabbalah was so I could make sense of some of the books, particularly Magic in Theory and Practice by Aleister Crowley, which was one of the first occult books I ever bought. So have we got any questions then while I get myself watered up? Any practical ones or theoretical ones? Any particular questions about what occultism actually is, what esotericism actually is? And hello to Michael. Michael, was it yourself who was talking about reading Blavatsky recently? Somebody had left a comment about reading Blavatsky's, just get it from my memory, Blavatsky's Occultism versus the Art of Occultism, something like that. It's quite a well-known pamphlet, I think, article that she wrote, and it's got a load of very good points in it, and I very quickly reread it, just in case I got asked questions on it, and it's very timely, I would have to say. It's something that Blavatsky wrote about, I guess, what I now call performative occultism versus actual occultism. So she was talking about occultism versus the art of occultism. And to me, that's occultism and esotericism versus what I call performative occultism. I saw somebody advertising themselves as a professional witch today on some platform or another. And I thought, professional witch? Wow, that's the thing. The people who taught me, I think, would be mystified, completely dumbstruck, I think, by the performative nature of occultism as it has become now. You have to be careful what you ask for. People in Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games have found this. Once upon a time, this was the geeky sort of niche subject that everyone thought, well, one day it'll be recognized by the world as the fun pastime it actually is, and everyone will be playing it. And of course, when that happens, you get commercialization of it, you get performance of it, you get instant expertise in it, and you then get accused of being a gatekeeper if you try and set any sort of boundaries or expectations or standards or teaching or anything along those lines. And the same has happened in occultism. I think it tends to go in decades. Over the last 40 years, I've seen it go very popular and then down again, and popular and down again, and so forth. But it's a very interesting thing to see how social media has really underpinned occultism. Yeah, so Blavatsky was talking about service. I think that's a very important concept in occultism, particularly the Western Esoteric Initiatory System that I teach. It's part of initiation is a divestment of the self, as in an attachment to a singular personality construct. And the more that one might work on that, the more one might realize how transient and fickle that relationship is that we have internally with a sense of identity, with a sense of self. And as such, that opens up the, I guess, fragility, the frailness of the self. And I think over time, a good response to that is a bit of kindness and a bit of mercy to oneself, but also to others. It's a very, maybe even a Christian ideal, I guess, but I think it stands in occultism as well, that we have to imagine that everyone around us has wings, but they can't see them, but neither can we. We can't see our own wings most of the time. And as such, we should treat people as fellow travelers along the way that we're all trying to find. And that is sometimes difficult to parallel with teaching, with authority, with expertise and hierarchy and so forth. But I think there's a measured place that we have where we both can teach from our own experience and share and be open to learning from other people. I think the whole idea of being an influencer is a very problematic one, because one of the first things that is in the Golden Dawn, for example, even as a neophyte, when you sign the document, the in effect contract to take on a path in the Golden Dawn as a neophyte, one of the things in there is, I shall not allow myself to be hypnotized. Now, the Golden Dawn had a very specific meaning for that. It basically meant that you would attempt at least to not allow other people to influence your own thoughts. And that was one of the things I was thinking about talking about today, if I may. And again, if you've got any questions, just put them in the chat. I can see the chat, so that's useful. But one of the things that we don't often talk about, and I've certainly not covered on the channel, and it's not going to be until a later version of the Magister, is about thinking, is about logic, is about training our own thoughts in order to think clearly, to think in a rational way. And this comes back to the Kabbalah, and I did select out actually for this, because this is, after all, the Magician's Bookshelf channel, so we can't go without books. When I learned, when I was taught logic by my esoteric teacher, it wasn't at college, it wasn't by a philosophy lecturer or professor, it was by my first occult teacher. And I was taught symbolic logic by Charles Dodgson, who you may well know actually is Lewis Carroll. And he wrote a book, well, 2 books, I guess, Game of Logic and Symbolic Logic. But symbolic logic is what my erstwhile occult teacher first of all taught me, because he wanted to know that I could think properly before he bothered teaching me. And symbolic logic is a hell of a thing. It's a hell of a thing to actually study. All y are x, all y are not x. If y is x, but x is not n, then what is n to y, and so forth. All philosophers are logical, and the illogical man is always obstinate. Does that make philosophers obstinate or not obstinate, or does it not infer either of those 2 cases? And so symbolic logic was my go-to for several months of trying to learn fallacies and assertions, the relationship between what's a proposition and what isn't a proposition. Hello, Sarah. Hello, Sarah. So symbolic logic was a basis of trying to learn how to think and trying to learn the language of how to think and trying to learn to recognize a fallacious argument and so forth. Now, there are a lot of better books now than Lewis Carroll, George Dodson's Symbolic Logic, and there are a load that I have in a pile somewhere because I'm making some notes of a particular chapter of the Magister, which will be on HOD, which I'll come to in a second. And I couldn't find my pile because it's probably somewhere buried under or behind another pile. But this is a really good version of it, The Art of Logic, by Eugene Cheng. And this sort of takes all of the maths almost and diagrammatic form of symbolic logic into something that is far more understandable and so forth. And this talks about the relationship between objects, the relationship of sets, which you find in symbolic logic and so forth, that people who can live in the US legally and US citizens within that, and all people as a set around that and so forth. And these sorts of diagrams are very useful in thinking, learning how to think. And it's a real lifesaver in occultism because one of the first things that people seem to eject entirely when they get into occultism is the ability to think, to question things, to have what Alice Crowley called his whole worldview scientific illuminism. Scientific illuminism, the art of science, the aim of religion. And so he didn't eject rational thinking, even though there might be a lot of evidence in his life that he did, but perhaps in behavioral terms. But certainly in terms of internal logic, he was pretty strict on having logic. Edward de Bono, abstract thinking, parallel thinking, and so forth. What's Edward de Bono's method of thinking called? Poe thinking. Edward de Bono is lateral thinking, of course. But learning to think is really important, and I'll show you where it's important on the Tree of Life, and perhaps we can talk about that. And again, any questions, just fire away. Otherwise, I shall talk about this for 10 minutes, if that's okay. So we have a blank sheet of paper. Now, for those unfamiliar with the Kabbalah, it is a route map, it's a plan, it's a way of looking at the universe, and we mustn't confuse it with the diagram I'm about to draw. The diagram I'm about to draw is called the Tree of Life because it resembles a tree with the roots at the top coming down, strangely enough. And these are not spheres that I'm going to draw, or lines or paths, even though we might call them Sephiroth or paths. This is just a way of diagramming the concept of it. We could do it in circles going out from each other. And again, if you read a Kabbalah book that talks about the spheres on the Tree of Life, then start to question that already, because it's already putting the wrong idea into your head of what these abstract things are. So imagine that the universe is everything. Let's take a moment of mindfulness and meditation, and imagine the universe is everything. So we can't call it the universe because there's nothing outside of it to refer to it as. So we just say universe. So there is a universe, and it's one thing, all things. There's no thing that is not universe. In order for there to be any identity, even of universe, it has to withdraw a part of itself. It has to make a difference somewhere. If there's no difference between anything, then everything is everything, and we're all illuminated. But we can tell we do not live in that world. There are separate things. We are separate to each other. There are separate things in our experience. So something happens to turn the unification into something, unitas into something. And so out of this blackness, the universe withdraws itself, and it makes a gap. And we draw that gap as a circle, vaguely as a circle. And so the universe is basically, if you imagine all of this as smoke, eternal smoke has just withdrawn itself. So there is a little gap now that is not smoke. And this is everything. Because if this is everything, then this is everything as well, because it's part of everything. Now, when that happens, when there's a withdrawal, it forms a point. So there is a point, and this becomes kether. So this then has the seed of the outside. It's almost as if when withdrawing, it's left all of itself in the smallest point possible, going from the everything, going to the nothing. And this is the fall, of course, the zero or the circle or the unnumbered card in the tarot. So it withdraws everything, creates a something, now we have something. That something then extends itself into a line. So the point now becomes a line. So instead of no dimensions, we have one dimension, just a line, distance, and an extension. And this, of course, is the wand of the magician. It's the extension, the first word, the first difference, the first naming of something. Because now we can say the universe, because there's all of this, but there's now a something. There's a line, there's a dot, there's a thing. There's something to look at the thing. So there's separation. And that's what happens. We get duality. So we now have two things. And this is then down in the world card as the wands that she is holding with the duality to it. So there's separation and duality. And so this is called Hokmah on the Tree of Life, which means it's a Hebrew word that means wisdom. And then that basically extends itself to make another of itself, because it's now making a pattern, and that becomes Bina, which means understanding. So we have Kether, which means crown, we have Hokmah, which means wisdom, and we have Bina, which means understanding, because it stands under Kether. And we now have a triangle. Once we have a triangle, we have a creative dynamic, and that basically then flips itself into existence. So now that triangle can do something, it can build something. It's like the eye in the triangle, literally. It now flips itself and recreates itself in time and in matter. So this is all abstract, and it is above the abyss, as it's called. But now this is material. We have time and we have space, and we have awareness, consciousness being able to form within it. And this pattern then repeats in manifestation, and then to balance the whole thing off, because we have 10 fingers, it then extends itself down to the bottom. And this is the Tree of Life. But it's basically a model, a way of picturing what is happening in our experience now, what is really happening just now. We are looking at a unified universe, and yet we are separate to it. We feel awareness separate to it. We feel separate to our own identity and so forth. And we make a map, and because the universe seems to have generated us in sets of 10 and sets of 3 and sets of 2 and so forth, we make a map that is mathematically pleasing to us, and seems to also be found then when you look at quantum physics and null string theory and membrane theory and M theory and so forth in quantum physics. And they talk about, it only works if you have 10 dimensions, 11 dimensions, but 6 of them have to be rolled up somehow, so that we only have the 4 dimensions of distance, time, and space, and so forth. And yeah, that's what the Kabbalists saw when they looked at the situation sort of 2,000 or so years ago. And then we draw some lines in between all of these things to actually then make a map of the whole thing. And so we draw these lines crossways, downways, and a few sideways. And basically we have a tree of life, and when you count the number of these things, these paths, these connections, these relationships between the Sephiroth, which means a numerical emanation, because this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, they are emanating out numerically down the tree of life. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which is very pleasing. When you count these things, you have 22 of them. So the number of paths equals 22. And strangely enough, that is the number of Hebrew letters, and then strangely enough, that is the number of major arcana in a standard tarot deck. So we have that equals the, spell it right, Hebrew letters. It's been a long, long day. I don't know about you, but this Friday has been a long day. 22 Hebrew letters and major arcana. Now, as my son used to say when I used to explain things to him when he was younger, hello, Patricia. Hello. I sometimes I tried to bring my son up in a semi-esoteric manner by explaining things to him, by doing thelemic things like showing him the consequences of his actions in real time if I could, and so forth. But when sometimes I would over-explain something and tell him, well, the reason that this had happened at school is because that person was possibly stressed, and stress is such and such, and this is that, and so on and so on. He'd listen very patiently, and then he'd say, but what does it mean? What does it mean? And that became a sort of family emblem for quite a while. I don't know what the Latin would be, but if it was on a shield, a coat of arms, I guess that would have been our families at the time. On the coat of arms, what does it mean in Latin? And why bother doing all of this? Why bother making such a complex map? And then having to learn the Hebrew letters like you have to do if you join our magical order. You have to learn the attributions of the major arcana of the tarot to the Hebrew letters and then to the paths. So you have to know that the moon tarot card is on this path, and it has the Hebrew letter of Kof. Not going to attempt it in Hebrew at the moment, of Kof on that path. Okay, so you've learned all of these things. So why do you learn them? What's the point of all of this? And I guess as this is our first Actual Magicians meeting, and I'd like to invite you all into the circle of being an actual magician. As far as I understand it, this map is really important because it provides a universal solvent to experience. There is nothing that cannot be mapped on this map. As Eliphas Levi said, that someone in prison, given only a deck of tarot cards, could figure out the entire universe from looking at those cards and all of the interactions between them and the patterns in them. And we do that. We do that as actual magicians. It is no use knowing all of this stuff. It is no use at all, other than to fill your head with a distraction until you die, or as my occult teacher used to say, what are you going to do before you become worm food? And so we don't benefit from learning this stuff. There's no benefit in learning this stuff, but there is in applying it. There is in applying it. knowing this stuff and then applying it is on this path here. See, we can map everything, even its own explanation can be mapped on the map itself. Because I know people talk about rules like the map is not the territory. Did you know there's a load more of those within the book? I can't remember whether it was a book or an article, but there are other things like a map is never complete. You can make a map of the map. That's a really good one. And with the Tree of Life, that you can see how this applies. You can make a map of the map. The Kabbalists called it the orchard, where each of the Sephiroth has more Sephiroth inside it, and a tree inside that, and a tree inside that, like a fractal, we now call a fractal, and that they call the orchard of trees, maps of maps. So here, this Sephiroth here, the numerical emanation of 8 is Hod. And the numerical emanation of 7 is Netzach. Netzach. There. And if we're mapping ourselves on this map, then this is our logic, our mind, and everything that structures on this pillar in our life. And this is our life. This is our emotions. This is our love, this is our time, this is a lower form of Hesed, loving kindness expressed in our everyday world, feelings. And to further demonstrate how the map works, if we now put planetary attributions on top of this, Hod is attributed to that planet, and let's say to that planet. So Hod is attributed to Mercury, things of the mind, that fluid, quicksilver nature of the mind, and Netzach is attributed to Venus, love, romance, feelings, emotions, and so forth. So these two Sephiroth, these two parts of the map, when we apply that map to ourselves, is we can apply this map to business, we can apply it to nature, we can apply it to the way economies work, we can apply it to anything. These two represent the mind and the emotions. And when we have those working with each other, we activate this path. So this path is the relationship between these two things. And what happens when you put your mind and your heart, your emotions together, mind, heart, and emotions, I guess, with Tifrath, is the blasted tower. The blasted tower goes on this path. There's a map. So blasted tower. And this is what I mean about the map. It shows us what happens and how to recognize when things are happening. When we change our minds, when we initiate ourselves and change our state of the middle of the tree, we are often doing it by climbing a ladder, you can see made out of 3 rungs, of the Tree of Life. And so we're applying it, but even better, we can apply it in ritual. And so Hod is the study of this, the magic of this, and Netzach is the practice of it. So magic in theory and practice. Crowley called it that because on that side we have theory, and on this side we have practice. And they have to come together. It's no use learning it and not applying it. It's no use applying it, trying to apply it. Oh, let's evoke Samuel today because it's a Thursday or a Wednesday, or because I want to curse someone, or I want a load of money, so I'm going to call up this demon or this Enochian spirit, and my patron spirit is such and such, and I've travelled on the 9th realm of this Enochian spheres or the alchemical planes and so forth. All of the practice without theory is also useless. It's useless for initiation, for change, for the actual core of esotericism. It's all performative when it's here, and it's all armchair when it's here. And when we bring those together, we have something that we call things. We have something that we call experience. And that is here. So we have theory, practice, and experience. And the experience is of the world, which is down here, which is the same as Kether, but after another manner. And that is on this path. And that path is the tarot card of the world. So it's the end of the world as we know it, as the song goes, is about changing the way we look at the world through experience, by thinking about it, by testing it out and experiencing it, going down the moon path, testing it again, changing the way we think about it, thinking about it again, experiencing it again, or having experiences and feelings, and then analyzing why we feel that way, what makes us feel that way, and so forth, bringing it down into our experience again, and changing the way we see the world. We are always astral traveling. This is astral. This is our astral travel. It's not real. It's an experience, a mental experience that we are making in our heads for whatever is going on at the moment, which is down here, Malkuth, the actual world. So this here is the actual world, and because we experience it through our senses, and then emanate thoughts and feelings about that experience, we make a map of it as our experience. So our experience is our map. And my occult teacher used to tell me that you cannot attack someone's beliefs because the person is their beliefs. This is why I don't try and change people's minds or try and convert someone to occultism or anything else. It is a waste of time. It's bad enough trying to change our own minds. It's bad enough trying to evoke our entire self into ourself, then mind evoking other spirits. How many of these occultists have actually evoked the entirety of their self into their self? Very few, I would imagine, but I think you need to do that first before bothering to add other guests to your empty house. So that is the way that works. Now, the Hebrew letter that goes on that path is called Tau, and that means a cross. And you can see where the cross is because if I just colour in that one there, you can now see where that cross is. Here's the rose symbolism goes here, and the cross here for the Rosicrucians. And that's where you can see the whole Rosicrucian symbolism coming in. So we have the world as Tau, the moon as Kaf, and then we have one last one just to put on these lower paths, the Hebrew letter Shin, which goes on this path, and that's the Last Judgment card. Because the Last Judgment card is about rising up to a new life. I'll get my tarot cards in a second. How are we doing time? 38 minutes. So the Last Judgment is on this path, and we then have the Hebrew letters of Kaf, Shin, and Tau. And Kaf, Shin, and Tau are actually a Hebrew word themselves, which means rainbow. And that is the rainbow that then arches over here. Can you see how this symbolism sort of ties together so neatly and on so many different levels? We've not even looked at the tarot as an illustration of this, but we can see how the structure is formed. But here's why the Golden Dawn failed. And this is what my MA thesis was actually on, really. It was on technically, it was about, where is it? It's somewhere here. Technically, my MA was called The Order of Revelation, the Magical Curriculum of the Western Esoteric Tradition. So this was basically a paper, a long paper, that analysed what was being taught in magical orders. But one of the interesting things about this, the Golden Dawn teaching, and the reason the Golden Dawn failed, is not specifically because the leaders were having political arguments and showing the frailties of their egos and their nature in fighting each other. They were doing that, but that's not why the order actually failed. On the back of the exam papers that people were filling in and ritual invitations that people were filling in, quite often they used the back of those papers to actually write notes to each other. And one of the things that I found in the original Golden Dawn archives is that a lot of students were complaining that they were learning for the sake of it. They didn't understand why they were learning for the sake of it. And some of the other students were complaining that they were taking part in rituals, but the rituals felt empty. They were going through the motions. So you had half the students going through the motions, and you had half of them learning without any context or application or reason, learning for the sake of it, learning to get the next grade, to pass an exam, to be given a higher grade in the order. But the reason was that the teachers themselves were too busy infighting to be teaching the real secret of Western occultism. And that is, in a word, correspondence. They weren't teaching, because they were too busy fighting each other, that this map corresponds to your real experience, that your real experience corresponds to the map, that everything corresponds to everything else in a structured hierarchical manner. And that's because of the way our own mind is making this reality as we speak. But guess what else it's making? It's making the map. So by looking at the map, and this is what Jung said about alchemy, he suggested that alchemists were studying chemistry, observing chemistry, but because they had no scientific knowledge of what was going on, they mapped it, but in doing so, they were actually showing us their map of experience, the way they experienced the world, and it just happened to be drawn in the symbolism of chemistry. And so that is where Jung had his real insight into alchemy and psychology. Not that it was showing how people were trying to make gold or anything else. It was actually a map, an illustration of the internal psychic, internal processes in the psyche itself, i.e. Yesod, i.e. here. And so as a result, he analysed the map that was being made in order to look at the psychic structure of the personality in terms of feelings and thoughts and self-identity on the map. So he went in here and looked up here from this position through the lens of alchemy. And this is how to use the map. And it's really important that we use the map and also apply the map, and that we take our ritual experience and our everyday experience and bring it back into the map. When we're doing work within our own order, one of the things that I sometimes will say to people is, where is that on the tree? How would you map that on the tree? Which tarot card would you say that relates to? And it's not just because there's some sort of secret teaching in that. It's the fact that it's trying to train us all to make these correspondences and to build a map that is congruent, consistent, and comprehensive. That it's congruent in that it can explain everything, anything. It's consistent in that it can do it not just once, but any time, and that it's comprehensive in that it applies to all things at any particular level that you want to go in. And Michael's saying it's hard to keep a lodge going, never mind the magical order. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the interesting things that I've liked to read a lot about over time from a management point of view, in terms of group dynamics and magical order dynamics as well, because it's a very tricky beast to wrangle into any sort of existence and then not just maintain it, but allow it to grow. And it's something that a few of us have been putting our minds to recently in terms of our own magical order. And I've been having this discussion with Charlotte Louise of late about the networked orders that I was involved in the long distant past 30 years ago, and how that matches people's expectations of magical orders now, and hierarchies and expertise and teaching and so forth. I was fine with magical teachers. I went to as many magical teachers as I could find when I was a kid. And I wrote to them, I went and met them, stayed with them, I tried to learn from them as much as I could. But now with social media, with the internet, there are really no neophytes anymore because all of the information is allegedly out there. So everyone has to start as a Celator. And we have a lot of really good Celators, but I don't think we have many decent Theoricuses or Practicuses or Philosophers or the other grades above here. We tend to have a very wide pyramid with a very, very steep incline up the magical order. Bota, builders of the Adiatum, I can never say that properly. Adiatum, Bota, which is probably why it's called Bota. It's got really, really interesting curriculum and really interesting structure, and it sort of took a lot of stuff, obviously from the Golden Dawn, mass synthesis, and injected some stuff and added a few other bits and pieces. So, yeah, is that Mark Hedsel, the Celator? Yeah, I wasn't quite sure what to make of that book, to be honest, but it's definitely an interesting book. So, what was that question? Would you please explain this from Hoda? I mean, by strong or bad enough to try and change your own minds is bad enough. Yeah, okay, so, yeah, sorry, I might have been a bit flippant about that. One of the things that I think is part of the work when you get a little bit beyond this point into the sort of psychological level of occultism, which maps here on the Tree of Life, trying to sort out one's own psyche. A lot of the work that I teach with this is particularly from the fourth way. You can see, I don't know if you can actually see them, they're off camera at the moment, but there's like books on Gurdjieff books and Ouspensky books and Nicole books and various other teachers of the fourth way, as it's called. And the fourth way is very much an esoteric way of thinking about one's own experience. And my first teacher was very much into the fourth way work. And one of the things that there's a good book called Waking Up by Charles Tart, which I highly recommend, Waking Up by Charles Tart, which has got a sort of psychological level approach to some aspects of the fourth way work. And it's really useful because he talks about different, what Gurdjieff called Kunda buffers, these buffers that we make to stop reality shocking us into existence. full existence of everything all at once. And Gurdjieff called them Kunda buffers. Charles Tart calls them, from a psychological point of view, as things like repression, depression, introjection, projection, all of the other mechanisms by which we have distraction to avoid really experiencing the world. And one of them, and particularly evident in a lot of fourth way teaching, is thinking about other people and thinking about them in a way that's entirely illusionary and unnecessary and useless, in the sense of thinking that we can really change someone's being. We know from our own work, when we try and work hard on ourselves, how bloody difficult it is sometimes to really change who we are, what we are, and to really dig into all of the crannies and reveal ourselves to ourselves in all of our might and power and glory and horror and shadow and terror. And so as a result, we tend to avoid that by thinking about other things, by distracting ourselves. And so I think it's bad enough, it's hard enough, is what I meant. It's hard enough trying to help someone, even if they paid you as a counselor or therapist or friend or hypnotherapist, is to try and change somebody and help them change themselves. That's difficult enough. So the idea that we can change anyone else is a little bit presumptuous, and perhaps it's always a good sign of what you need to change inside yourself, not what you need to change in somebody else. And that's useful. It's useful for that. But one of the distractions that I see a lot in occultism, and I've been seeing it a lot more recently, and this was no different 45 years ago, I have to say, but it's just on a more obvious, wider network scale now, is all of the people teaching things like magical combat, or I was once invited to join a hunting lodge where people were going on the astral to attack other people and defend themselves against other attacks and things like this, or summoning angels, demons, Enochian spirits. There's a series of books with, it's almost got that sort of weird, hefty voiceover of, this month I invoked Barzabal, the ninth demon of the fourth plane, a spirit so malign and malignant that only the bravest, strongest, and courageous of magicians could possibly keep their sanity. And yet I managed it, and you too can learn how to do this if you buy my latest, very, very expensive book with 4 pages in it, saying a terrible poem about how to invoke Barzabal. And all of that, to me, I use the analogy of being given the escape map into reality, out of our illusionary prison, looking at the map and then papering it to decorate your cell. That you are just taking the escape map and decorating your cell with it. And it ends up being a very impressive cell, I'm sure, but that is not the purpose of the map. The map is there for you to learn from, memorize, eat, internalize, and then use it to get the heck out of there. That is what the map is for. And I think it's hard enough, it's difficult enough to invoke one's full entire self, to really get to the edges of your whole personality, both the shadow, the inner child, the wounded bits, the hurt bits, the separated bits, the bits that are no longer in a viable contract, internal contract with each other, and get them talking again, and all of that sort of thing, before then invoking entities, literally alien or alienated spirits, into one's magical triangle, magical circle, magical temple, or internally. And I think that has a place. It has a really big place in Western occultism for sure, and in our own work and in our initiatory work as well. Within our magical order, although it's not something that is very prevalent at the moment because people are too busy working on themselves first, which is what I would encourage. And yeah, so I think that's my answer, that there's a lot of work to be done at this level before we go up to this level. This level is the Adeptus Major in the grade system, and it's where Crowley said that we learn how to do actual magic. This is the actual magician's workplace, is way up here. But you can see how unbalanced it is on the rest of the tree. It's over here, and it's high up, and it's really overbalanced. It's somewhere way up here. So if this is a bit shaky, if this lot is a bit shaky, then doing practical, actual, honest, actual magic up here, it can cause an awful lot of resonance in your own psyche, in the psyche of those immediate to you, in the psyche of those connected to you, in your environment, and so on. It can have massive shifts of actual magic when applied up here. So that's why we do all of the work to try and dig ourselves out in our entirety as much as possible. It's an ongoing task. The whole tree is the ongoing task, but that's what I'm talking about there. The people sort of go, oh, let's invoke a spirit, and as Aleister Crowley points out, when you do Liber Astarte, a practice that goes here on the map, because again, there's a curriculum, there's a hierarchy, there's a structure, and it's the one I teach, and developed from the Golden Dawn system and other systems. But the, what was I saying? The practical work goes sort of here and here, but if you're doing Liber Astarte, that's where I was, Liber Astarte, I had to look at Venus and think that's Astarte, so that must be Liber Astarte. Then the problem is, Aleister Crowley said, is that if you don't think about it, if you don't really analyze it, what happens when you choose a god or goddess to work with, then that always comes from your own imbalance. You will always choose the one that is most likely to attract you. And that attraction comes from a lack of equilibrium. You're attracted to one thing more than another. You're attached to one thing more than another. And so quite often the god or goddess that someone chooses to work with, and we sort of teach in our outer training, the Crucible Club, which is 1 year self-study course, a sort of pared down version of Liber Astarte. But that is not to, this is between us 12 here. There's a good coven formed of 12, 13 of us. It's either a coven or a discipleship. We do that in order to see what someone chooses, because that tells us more about their personality and who they are and where their imbalances are likely to be than anything else. And it's useful for them to work with that before they really then later on come through the grades and get to work on it for a full 6 months, dedicating themselves to one deity. They have to have made a bit more of a balance down here first. And Crowley sometimes said that these grades are very difficult because for the first time you leave the middle pillar. And again, this is all the language of the map. It's all on the map. And the teaching and the mechanism and the observations, the way we can balance things, the way we know where things have gone off balance, all sorts of things, they're all on the map. And this is why we teach both the theory, the application and practice of it in people's experience, so that we can get a full rainbow. Because then once we have our rainbow, we saw Kesheth, the rainbow here, guess what we then have? We have another shape that we can form, which is an arrow that is firing up from the rainbow of Kesheth working here. The Golden Dawn said that the formula of Kesheth is the most important formula of all, and this is why. It's because it empowers us through the moon, through the Last Judgment, through the world, of constantly repeating, making new decisions, blasting, towering them, testing them in reality, then going back down, revising our model of the world, changing the way we look at things, and going round, breaking that model down, building it back up, going round again, and so forth. And that fires this Kesheth, this bow. And just before we finish, first of all, if you've got any questions, I'll be glad to take them. But I was just going to take a look at one tarot card to sum up our experience of our this is our first actual magician's meeting, so that's quite nice. I want to find one card. I guess we can find the moon. Yeah, let's find those three cards. And so I need the world. I need the world, and Last Judgment. Last Judgment. In the world. There we go. Nothing like preparation, and this is nothing like preparation. So hopefully we've learned something in terms of the tree of life and seeing correspondences and models and so forth. Incidentally, did I answer that question, Hoda? I hope I did. So we have the moon over here, as we've seen already. And now you can see where those two towers are. Those two towers are the two pillars up here. So you can now see that that path is the one that is winding up here. And that's what Pamela Collins-Smith has drawn on that card. Then we have the Last Judgment. Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Then we have the Last Judgment. And now you can see where that trumpet is coming from. You can see how the trumpet is actually coming down this path here. That's actually coming down this path. When we did our own deck, from which that angel comes from, with art by Janine Hall, the Canadian artist, beautiful, beautiful art, took 12 years to do 22 tarot cards. All of the pictures, all of the illustrations, all of the fantastic bits of artwork actually have the paths drawn on them more specifically. Pamela Collins-Smith was never consistent, unfortunately. So, yes, she may have got the path going roughly the right direction on this, but then it's not apparent in many of the other cards. So we tried to do it more consistently. But you can see now we've got these three figures making the L, V, and X sign, which means Lux, welcoming a new life, a totally new way of looking at things in HOD, because their model has changed so that they can go back around the cycle again. Then in the middle, we have the world with the two pillars, with the duality, and the recognition that all things have been drawn from a point, and that there is a spiral going down the tree of life, and you can see that that's on that card as well. And the 72 names of God are in the oval around her. So I hope that's given you a Raven song, and she didn't hide them on purpose. She really didn't. If you read Secrets of the Waitsmith Tarot, my co-author Tali Goodwin and I show how the majors were particularly Waite's conception. The minors were more Pamela Collins-Smith's conception, and they hid some things, but Waite can't help himself in Pictorial Key talk about those things. And when we worked on Waite's second tarot deck, or tarot images, which is Abiding in Sanctuary, if you just pardon me a second, I'll grab that. So these are Waite's actual tarot images, and this is the High Priestess, or part of the High Priestess on the back there. And we can see from these how Waite conceptualized the tarot, and as a result, because these are 10 years later, we can see, for example, this is the moon, two different versions of the moon, if I can hold those up. Yeah. And can you see how the moon is reflecting the sun? But the sun is actually Christ. And J.B. Trinick has put the poppies from Flanders down at the bottom of that because it's about memory and so forth. But we know from these images exactly what Waite intended in these images. This is like the cartoon version, not in a bad sense, sort of in a bad sense compared to these, but this is the sort of cartoon version, a sketch version perhaps, a public version of what Waite was really getting at with the cards. So they're hidden, some of the symbolism is hidden, but it's not deliberately hidden, if that makes any sense at all. For example, it's blatantly obvious that the sun is Christ. It makes no secret about it, that the sun is Christ to Waite. But in the Waite-Smith tarot, he does actually explain that the sun, the child, is actually Christ on the white horse on the day of last judgment with his red banner. And the red, which Waite is the only time he mentions colour in the entire Pictorial Key. That flag being red is specifically red, and the horse is specifically white or drawn as white because the child is the Christ triumphant, and the flag is soaked with the blood of the sinners. That's why it's red. And I think people look at that card, and without that sort of knowledge that Waite was really trying to get Christian mysticism and his own version of Christian mysticism into the deck, they look at it as a little child on a pony, when in fact it's like, the triumphant Lord and Saviour on the day of resurrection and judgment, soaked with the blood of the sinners, come to sort out the wheat from the chaff. And that isn't obvious in the Waite-Smith version. It is when you read it and you know where Waite is sort of coming from its own internal system. But that's the way it's hidden. That's how it's actually hidden. It's literally hidden in plain sight. It's occult because it's there if you know the language that they're using for it. So the four figures here represent the four quarters, the four saints, the four elements. So fire, air, water, and earth. So they represent all sets of four in that. And it's interesting whether people apply those to a tarot reading. Like if someone says, should I go on holiday next week, or should I obey my boss and stick to my office job, whether you still read these as the four sort of saints or cherubs representing the four quarters or the four elements. And that's again coming from, is it important to know these? It is important to know them if you're applying them to something. If you're applying them to the map, if you're applying them to your study, if you're applying them to a ritual or other experience. Just going back to something that Michael was saying, talking about putting a different tarot card above his bed and unconsciously sleeping on it. That's a great technique. We also have a technique by which we activate each of the cards in our real lives, one at a time over a period of about 8 months it usually takes. And we work through the cards starting with the Magician until we get to the World card. And I think I've given that as exercise 50 in Tarosophy, in my book Tarosophy, which I should wave at the where's the later version of it. Excuse me another second. Okay. So in Tarosophy, exercise 50, if I can find it, right at the back, is about working with each of the cards in order. I probably won't be able to find it now. It doesn't matter. It's in this book. A specific method. Again, that was actually a method that my first teacher taught me. And the first day I tried it, starting with the Magician card, I got mugged that evening. And then I realized how much the Magician card is a card of trickery and so forth. So, yeah, I've always looked at the Magician a bit more suspiciously ever since, and for good reason. Very mercurial, and I wasn't expecting that to be my first real-life activation of the archetype of the Magician. But the Magician was a trickster and taught me that lesson very, very well, and also the god of thieves and merchants. So make of that what you will. Okay, so we've run to 1 hour 11 minutes. We've got 11 people, so that's 1. So I think that's a good magical number to conclude our very first live session. If you've got any questions, just dump them in the comment section. I will come back to this tomorrow to have a look, and then I don't know when I'll be doing another live. I'll try and do them on Fridays, and they'll be intermittent, but I will announce it in the Facebook group and so forth, because this is a bit of an experiment, see how we do here on Facebook. So thanks a lot for bearing with me, and I hope something's been useful in this. And Tarosophy Squared is still in print, that is this version of it. So that's the one I wrote sort of 10 years after Tarosophy. So that's full of slightly more mystical. But that's great. I hope we all feel a little bit more intelligent. A little bit more intelligent whenever we have discussions. That's always a nice thing to feel, that you feel. I always like to feel a bit more inspired as well. That I love learning stuff. I really do love learning things. And when you learn one thing, you realize that there's more to learn. There's always more to learn. So what's that? Names of books in the show notes, please. Excellent. Yeah, I can do that. I can do it. And certainly as well, if you check out the other YouTube videos that I've done, what I'm trying to do this year is basically do a bit of a brain dump, so that I can't complain anymore about everyone else on YouTube talking nonsense about occultism, if I'm not actually putting my voice out there and saying, well, this is what I think about it. And then it saves my own mental energy and space of not thinking that there's a load of misinformation or disinformation out there, that if people want to study, read around and so on, that some of the things I've experienced over the last 45 years are out there as well. And then I can think that I've done a job well done, or even part done. So thanks a lot. And even if it's a lunch break visit, then thank you very much for spending your lunch break with me. That's exciting. And thanks a lot. So I shall see you anon. We have a Facebook group, but also there's a little bit of a sort of community building going on here on YouTube. So if you're more on YouTube, then I'm spending a lot more time here. And also, what was I going to say? There's a load of shorts. I'm doing 3 or 4 books every single day all year, and I'm selecting books. It might not be obvious, but I'm selecting books out of thousands of books and saying these are my top 3, or these are the 4 books I think are best or more interesting in this subject area. So again, I'm trying to do a brain dump in case I get run over by a bus, and then all of this reading that I've ever done in my entire life will be a little bit to waste. So what I'm trying to do this year is just commit every day, showing 3 or 4 books in alchemy, in Crowley, in Thelema, in ritual magic, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, all sorts of subjects, and just for my own, again, sanity, saying, hey, look, I spent 35 years reading, and if I choose 3 books, these are the 3 books I choose, for what it's worth to anyone else, but these are the 3 books I choose. So it's been a bit of a filing system. So thanks a lot. I enjoyed doing the tarot on during the pandemic. We had a real nice vibe, and we still have a little quiet community called Use Saloon, from the survivors of that time, that came together to share the tarot on and the bedtime stories and everything else. So the birth of Use Saloon, excellent. Yeah, it was. So thanks a lot for spending your time with me, and I look forward to more questions, more discussion, and so forth, and taking your guidance as to where we go in this as well. So I remember the bedtime stories. I wish I could go back and do a more Morgan Freeman voice on all of them, or Orson Welles or something. But they are what they are, and I enjoyed reading them out again, partly for my own sanity as well as everyone else's, and everyone was so really great company as well. That was a good time in that one sense at least, and so at least something came out of that. Okay then, thanks a lot for your time and attention. I bid you farewell in the manner that we have, which is we start with, by our work we are changed, and now I hope you see why we say that. By our work we are changed. This is the Kesheth, the important bit. Change comes from work leads to change, and we always end with the worker is hidden in the workshop. This is the workshop, and we are all hidden in it all of the time. So thanks a lot. And again, the worker is hidden in the workshop. I'll see you at some point soon. Take care.